So I want to talk about pinch pots. First, I'm going to make a small one for you, and then I'm going to try and make a larger one. If you happen to have clay with you, you are welcome to work along with me at the same time. That way, as questions arise, you can try it out yourself. If you've never made a pinch pot before, I would say trying to get a block of clay that fits comfortably inside of your hand. When you first start out, if the ball of clay is too big, then the pot kind of gets away from you. So this first pot that I'm going to make is probably closer to the size of a cup than it is the size of a soup bowl. So one of the things about making bowls, we want you to make multiple bowls. We're going to try a couple of different techniques, so they're not all going to be the same, and then you're going to try and make pots that are the same. One of the ways to make sure that pots are the same is to always weigh your clay. So if I want to make multiple bowls, and I want them to be exactly the same, then starting with the same amount of clay, and there is a scale in here, can really add to the success, right? So you can see this fits inside my hands. My fingers can almost wrap around it. When I'm ready to open it, I'm going to find right in the center of the circle and press straight in and open it up with a hole. The thickness between where I press my thumb in and the outside ball is about 3/4 of an inch. So I am going to start by pinching in a circle out from that center point. So one of the main things about pinch pots is learning how to control the opposing pressure of your thumb and finger. Inside, your thumb is pressing out, and on the outside, whatever direction your thumb is pressing, you want this finger to receive it. And if I start from the bottom in a spiral and work out towards the rim, it's going to start out kind of lumpy, but I am systematically squishing the clay in such a way that it's going to thin out the wall, make the pot a little bit bigger. I'm still working on my first spiral. I haven't even gotten all the way up to the rim on the first try. So this is a pretty slow and methodical procedure. It actually can be quite meditative. These repetitive motions are good for building strength in your hands, and also is really calming to have this sort of repetitive motion over and over again. You get into a rhythm or a flow, and a lot of times it can really clear your mind. So that first time that you are going from the base to the top, you can see a lot of thumbprints, a few surface cracks. Whenever I see surface cracks, I might rub them back together with my fingers. They'll only get bigger the more I stretch the clay. So if they're small, then I can rub them back together. The thickness of the wall is more like 1/2 inch now. So at first, I can really take the thickness down really quickly. But then as I continue, and maybe I need to start from the bottom and go up to the top another 3 or 4 times to really like this pot, it'll get thinner and thinner, and it's smaller and smaller amounts because you want to control the curve as you go. So I'm going to start back at the bottom, pinching between my thumb and my middle finger, and this is going to be the last time I can actually reach that bottom easily. So I'm going to be really careful to pinch in such a way that the bottom is smooth and even in section. Now, it may not be as thin as it's going to be in the end, but it's not going to be lumpy. So as I'm moving along, if I feel a thick spot, I'm going to press harder. And if I feel a thin spot, I may move my hands over it to soften the curve, but I'm not going to press to make it thinner. I want everything else to catch up. So every once in a while, you'll see me change my hand position just to kind of relax my fingers. But I'm still trying to get that thumb to fingertip pressure. They're actually like little small planes. And whatever direction you hold that plane in relationship to this central axis changes the curve. So if I hold the planes this way, I would end up making a V shape. I want mine to curve and then come up straight. So I'm going to move my hand in that shape as if I could draw a line on the table to tell you what I wanted that side profile to be. I'm going to mimic that with the shape of my fingers and how I kind of come up the sides of the wall. So I'm going to pause for a second while I pinch all the way to the rim. And this is a good time to ask questions, especially if you tried a pinch pot already. Who had trouble opening the pinch pot and determining the basic shape? Okay, so it's gotten maybe a third thinner than it was. A little bit lumpy, but still pretty even. I'm also thinking about this rim. So is it flat? Is it level on top? I don't want this to be really thin. It's really easy to pinch too much right on the rim and get the rim thin before you actually get the pot as wide as you want. So we kind of think about how big is that ball and how big can we stretch it. Now, I'm about to the point where I cannot touch the bottom anymore. If I need to pinch a little bit on the bottom, but I can't do it between my fingertips, then I'm going to support the curve with this palm, and I'm going to press my finger down in that center and then out in a spiral with my palm supporting it on the other side. And then once I get up to the spot where I can get between my fingers again, I'm going to do that because I have a lot more control. Some of the things that beginners tend to do is, one, they pinch between too many fingers, so they pinch between their thumb and 3 fingers, and the pot will widen too fast, and you will lose control of the shape. Sometimes people don't pinch enough, actually get a little bit timid, and the pots get really, really thick. So if I was to set this on the table, the curve on the bottom of the pot would sag a little bit. The pot's actually pretty soft. If your clay is dry, then it has the tendency to crack, especially along the edge. Here, I'm getting some surface cracks right at the tip, and I'm just going to rub those over with my finger to kind of smooth them out. Every time I get up to the rim, I'm going to check it out, make sure it's not getting too thin, make sure it's not getting cracked, see if I can get it level. I can always trim it later, but the more attention I pay to it now, the better the pot will be. Okay, so I'm getting close. This is pretty good shape for a cup, right? I could actually have a little bowl of soup in that and drink out of it, but it's too thick for me. This tiny little guy needs to be thinner. So now, what do I do? One, my hands are getting a little bit dry. If you feel like you start to see clay on your hands and it's changing color, like here you can see where it's a little bit wet and then it's a little bit dry, I might get just a tiny little bit of water on my hands. So our hands pull moisture out of the clay, and so if you're getting a lot of surface cracks, I don't wipe this with a sponge or get it super wet or get my hands super wet, but I might put a little bit of moisture on my hands, and then that'll help those cracks. If you get really big cracks in the rim, and I'll have to tear it to make that happen, but let's say you get a really big crack. You're like, oh my gosh, you totally just destroyed that pot. Yeah, what do you do about that? So naturally that can happen on the rim pretty easily if your clay is dry. If you get to a crack and you rub it and then you pinch and it opens again, and then you close it and you pinch and it opens again, that's telling you there's not enough clay there. So I'm going to take clay and I'm going to add it. Mostly pinch pots are deformative in nature, meaning whatever clay you start with is the clay you finish with. It's just in a different form. But this is an additive process. It will help us sculpt problems away. So I can add clay and I can smooth it in such a way that I could repair that tear without you really ever knowing that it was there. If a crack continues to open and open and open, it really means there's just not enough clay to do what you want to do, or it's getting too dry. So if it's wet, add clay. If it's too dry, start over. You may have to make 3 or 4 pinch pots to get to one you like. Okay, so I've repaired that. If I set this down and walked away, you guys could come in here and you still wouldn't know where that spot was. One more time, now that I know my crack is finished, I want this to be bigger, but I can't reach the bottom. So this is the only time that I'm gonna use pressure unopposed. I'm actually going to run my finger inside of this profile from the center out to the rim in a big arc. So just like I said, I might turn my fingers to really describe a shape. Here, I'm gonna actually make that as a stroke, almost like a brush stroke. And I'm gonna do it by supporting it in my palm. So I'm holding it in my hand, I'm starting in the center, and with just a single fingertip to keep control, I'm gonna run all the way up to the rim. And what that's doing is thinning and widening the vessel. So I'm supporting it so I can show you that shape. But if you were to actually watch it, you can probably see my finger, assuming the video's strong enough, like from that center point, you can actually see that pot growing. So if I have a little bit of faith that my section is pretty even, I can do it unsupported and really balloon this vessel out. So I'm probably widening it like a ½ inch, the diameter of it easily. Maybe at the rim it'll be almost an inch wider by the time I'm done, starting from the center and wiping up the vessel. So the bottom is pretty thin, it has a nice curve, but maybe because of the way that I did that, it's a little bit uneven. So I'm going to reach back down as far as I can and just check on the section. And if it's thick, I'm going to pinch harder. If it's thin, I'm not going to pinch at all. And I'm shaping it at this point. I'm really paying attention to the curve. I'm feeling it in my hands. And I'm trying to make it even. And I work pretty smooth. There's a few fingerprints on this and a few dry cracks that I'll take care of in just a minute, or when it's a little bit stiffer. But some people like to really show their fingerprints, and it's beautiful with the glaze. Most of the glazes I pick have a great response to texture. They change color, like really dramatically from like an orange to a dark brown or a light tan to a rusty red. So texture can be quite lovely. All right, so that's a lot bigger. So look at that compared to the size of my hand from when I started. So it's probably 3 times the size of that early ball. And now I can go around the rim and really make it even. So if the section on the rim shows a thin spot, then a thick spot, and a thin spot again, then you're going to read the whole pot as uneven. So the pot can be kind of lumpy, but if the rim reads really smooth and clean, your eyes are less likely to see those other imperfections. It's the rim that catches the shadow, right? You guys can even see that on the camera. The inside of this pot looks like a black hole, but I bet you can see that edge, right? It's in the light. No matter which direction I turn it, that rim is always going to be what's highlighted. So that is one of like the finishing details that you could really think about. Pinch pots are pretty simple. What kind of details are you giving this guy to really make him special? So this is good for a tea bowl. Right now the base is totally round. What do I do with it? Well, it's super soft. Can you see it kind of moving? Like, can you see it going a little bit, right? So we want to be careful with that. Clay has a memory. If I wanted to stiffen this up a little bit, I would turn it upside down on its rim and let it rest for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. If I couldn't come back to it in 20 minutes, I might lightly drape it in plastic. If you're having trouble finding plastic, maybe save some of your old grocery bags. Bring some from your apartment. After 30 minutes, things that I would do to this might be rub it with a sponge to smooth out the surface, or maybe even a rib. So this is a really common sponge. I might have a wooded rib if I wanted something to be straight. Sometimes I use flexible ribs, and these ribs curve, and you can shape the outside of the pot by using a curved rib to give it a little bit of smooth texture. And then I think I see one metal one down here. I love these metal ribs. These are great for scraping and also for shaping. This one is pretty stiff, but they can also bend inside of your hands and really change the surface and even the shape of your vessel. After this stiffens up, I might think about how it sits on the table. If I put it on the table now, bottom side, it'll sag. That curve is too soft. But if I let it stiffen up a little bit, I could either flatten off the bottom, or maybe I could add some feet. Maybe this guy could be a cute little tiny ice cream bowl or something, and maybe it would prefer to have some little feet on it. So if I want to add clay, that would be a way. Right now I'm just setting them on here. We won't want to attach them. Just a second, when I talk to you about coils, we'll really know what does it mean to attach them. Just sitting on there. So I can imagine those little tripod feet being what it sat on. So a couple people said they made pinch pots, at least 3 people. You have to talk out loud right now and tell me about your experience while I get set up to show you a coil pot. So who out there made a vessel?
I made one.
Okay, tell me how it went for you.
I think that my clay was not the correct consistency when I started, which may have caused other problems. I think it was a bit too dry. I had to add a bunch of water to it. Like I felt like at least I did constantly. But it went pretty well. It was my first pinch pot ever. So I think it went decently well. The rim is a bit uneven, which I could work on. The wall thicknesses, I would say for the most part are even. I don't think that the wall thickness is even to the bottom thickness, which I could work on that. But I had a lot of fun making it. I did it 2 times and then I just crushed those into a ball. And this was my 3rd attempt, which I was more satisfied with. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I feel like you answered a lot of my questions during your demo though.
Okay, well, name one of the questions that spoke to you.
Well, my main one was getting the rim even. And I kind of just like pushed my finger around it. But now that I know that it might be easier to maybe cut off like really uneven parts while it's still wet. Yeah, that was like what the main one.
Yeah, when you are done with your pots, I love this guy. This is called a Sureform. You can get these at the hardware store. They are in the small tool section, like where they have drill bits and things like that. It is for shaping Bondo and drywall and stuff. Sometimes they're really, really long. I like these little teeny ones. I have one that I bought from a pottery store. It's like 7 times more expensive. It just has a different shape handle, but it's the same grade. These things are great for shaving pots if they're leather hard. You can cut your pots. I'm just trying to see if there's like a little knife or something in here. You can actually cut the rim of your pots when they're leather hard. So, Steph, tell me, is your pot already dried out a little bit? Has it started to change color?
Yeah, I did it last week and then I left it outside in the sun to dry a little bit. So yeah, it's a lighter color now.
Yeah, great. Okay, so a couple things just in case you're new to pottery. Clay changes color and it shrinks when it dries. So right now, when it comes out of the bag, it should be in a pretty good workable state. But it dries out in your hands and when you work with it. And then if you leave it out to dry, once you shape it, it goes through 2 stages. So this I would call wet clay, greenware, wet clay. It can also be greenware when it's leather hard. So this has sat out for a little while. It hasn't changed color, but you can't easily crush it. Like this one, I could easily, I could just put that into a pancake. But this one, you really have to like press it and pop it. It's actually the strongest it is when it's dry at that point. And that's the time that you can shave them and carve them, cut them. When they change color, pretty much the only thing you can do is take a sponge to them. So you can wipe the rim flat, but it has to still be this wet color for you to be able to cut the rim or shave the rim with a tool like this. So that's just a tip for you guys working in the future. That middle stage, leather hard. And I say the clay is like cheddar cheese. Right now this is like goat cheese, right? I can squish it like goat cheese. But if it's like cheddar cheese and you have to like snap the block, then that's leather hard. If it is really dry and change color, you are not doing any wet working procedures to it. The only thing that you can do is wipe it with a sponge. The sponge works like sandpaper. It just doesn't create dust. So up until it goes into the kiln, the sponge is really helpful for wiping up any kind of surface defects, things like that. So what I've done here is made a shallow pinch pot. As you can see, it's still pretty thick. Maybe this pot is not big enough for you. Maybe you would like to make your bowls bigger. You may add clay to your bowls around the rims through coils. So I've just taken off a chunk of clay that I can fit easily in my hand, and I'm rolling it back and forth to get it into the shape of a rod, or maybe I can pinch it. Before it gets too thin, I'm going to put it on the table. You saw I put a little bit of water on here because this porous table will take moisture out, and you don't want your coils to dry out. So I'm going to roll this back and forth. The idea for the coil is that you start in the center, and I'm pressing down pretty firmly, and I'm rolling my hands out to the edge. So as my hands move out, the coil stretches. And I want this thing to be about this section. So that's a little bit thinner, maybe than my thumb, right around the thickness of that. So with this coil, I'm going to kind of flatten out the ends a little bit so it's beveled. That's a nice beginning and ending. And then if I want to make my bowls bigger, I can lay these coils of clay around the rim. And with that bevel, if my coil is a little long, I can roll right up it and keep going. And connect it. And then I'm going to begin to smooth these in. So I'm going to add one more coil so it gets a little bit taller before I smooth it in. So who else besides Steph made a pot? There was 1 or 2 more people out there.
I did.
Okay, how did it go for you?
It was pretty okay. I made like a ramen type of bowl. But the biggest problem I had was like the cracking at the top edge, and it's like super just like not smooth at all.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any tools, so I was kind of going with just my hands. So.
Okay, so based on the demo, what do you think you could do differently to keep it from cracking on the rim?
Probably adding more water because I barely used any water on my hands. So.
Okay, so it got dry. Anything else?
No, I also had issues with like shaping. I didn't realize that you can like let it sit for 30 minutes because the bowl kept getting like wonky when I was trying to shape it. So that was another issue I was having.
Okay, so yours is a V shape, right? It has a tiny base and a wide rim. So anything that has a cantilever is going to want to widen and flatten. That's a natural tendency of the clay. And anything that goes outside of the shape of that palm of your hand, it also wants to kind of flop around. So yeah, you definitely noticed the right thing in the demo is that sometimes we wait. If we need to do a really challenging form where we're asking a lot of the structure, like a cantilever, when the clay is really damp, then sometimes we build as much as we can and then we wait. So I'm making another coil to add to my pot. Maybe you noticed I rolled it a little bit and then I stopped because I noticed it's like thick on one direction and thin on another. I'm going to stand it up so it's tall, and I'm going to pat the tall end. I'm going to square it off a little bit, but I don't want it to be an oval. I want it to be as close to round as possible. So I'm going to try and take out that weird dimension by patting it into shape and then refold. If your coil gets too long, what will happen is you'll be pressing in the center and then these ends will be flopping really crazy. So if your coil ever gets too long, just pinch it, set the other half off to the side, and make this one the proper dimension. And then I'm just gonna bevel the ends a little bit, come back to this guy, and then I'm gonna start right on that bevel to make it a similar thickness. Then I'm gonna roll around. And let's say I really want this to all be one level. My coil's a little too long. I don't want it to jump. I'm just gonna pinch it off there and then have that be the way I level the pot, right? So even though I had to make a couple of coils to put that together, the top is now level because I ended the coil in a very specific place. So now we need to blend these guys together. As you can see, they're kind of fat, and then they have these divots in between. What we want to do is take the fatness of the coil and kind of push it into those negative spaces. I'm actually going to do the inside first because it's easier for me to support on the outside. And so I'm going to start with my thumb on this top coil and rub through the two other coils below it. You can see that stripe a little bit. But so now I'm just kind of rubbing through those coils, and it's a little bit messy at first, but it's most important just to support the shape. I can come back and smooth out that surface in just a minute. Right now I'm just trying to figure out how to get my hand inside of it, kind of push those coils without really changing the shape of the vessel. All right. So maybe you can see that there's finger marks all the way around it, but it's all kind of blended in. Before I do too much cleaning up on the inside, I'm going to go ahead and blend this outside. So I'm going to start on this top coil and blend right through the coil below it. So it actually gets thinner. Like, you don't want to make your coils the section of your vessel, because you're going to thin them by the way that you rub them together. So they are probably at least 1/3 thicker than you think your pot is going to be in the end. Maybe sometimes as much as twice the thickness you think your pot's going to be. Because I'm going to blend this together and shape the pot, maybe even by scraping it. So the only way to trim down to a perfect surface is to have extra clay to trim. So that middle coil is actually a little bit bigger than the top one. I'm going to rub it both directions, help fill in that negative space.
Hey, Martha.
Yeah.
Does like thinking you're filling in the negative space, like could that possibly leave bubbles inside of the pot or air bubbles?
There is a small chance you might rub a bubble into that spot. With enough pressure, they're pretty much going to pop. The bubbles thing is an interesting physics challenge. So most people will tell you, and certainly your elementary school teacher told you if there's a lot of bubbles in your pots, that they will blow up. It's actually the moisture that makes things pop and crack. Now, if you have a big bubble, it can make it hard to make, it can crack later, there can be a lot of problems, but you might make a tiny little microscopic bubble doing this, but not big ones. If the pot is totally dried out, those microscopic bubbles will give you no problems. If the pot's really wet, what happens is moisture gets trapped in those bubbles, and then they pop when that moisture expands into a gas when you put it into the kiln. If it is a really, really big bubble, like sometimes people will actually make pots that are closed up, right? Like if I put these two things together and now I have this egg shape and there's no way for that air to get out, that is a lot of air. And the pot will crack because it's shrinking so much around that air that it will physically can't compress anymore. And so the seam would bust or the whole pot would explode inside of the kiln. So big bubbles are a problem, but microscopic bubbles in totally dry pots don't concern me. One time bubbles can be really annoying is if you have one in your vessel and you're trying to shape it, and then the bubble just keeps pushing back and forth in the wall. You'll notice that mostly on slab pots when you roll out reclaimed clay and you'll see a bubble got trapped inside of that slab because of the way all the clay particles stack on top of each other. The bubbles are really easy to see. And so whenever you see a bubble, if you can feel it, pop it. If you can't feel it, it's probably not going to be a problem. Okay, so still a little bit lumpy, a little thicker than I want, but much larger than I made with the pinch pot. So anytime that you want to make your pot bigger or you have a crack, add clay. To keep going with this, I would keep adding coil after coil and make it as big as I want. When it is not glossy anymore, I can't easily change the surface with my fingerprint. That would be a good time to use either the Sureform or the metal scraper to shape it. And what that looks like, I can easily use the metal scraper to kind of play with this curve a little bit. So right now I had like kind of a corner right here and I didn't like it. I'm going to use this scraper while it stops to kind of reshape the pot. And based on how I support it on the inside or the outside, that's going to help determine how easy it is to change that curve. So I might shape it with the tool. If it is too thick, and the pot would have to be a lot drier, but not changing color yet for this to really work. This works like a cheese grater. I can probably get it. The most common thing is to shave the rim to get it to be flat. So if it has tiny little lumps in it, then you can see it makes this like tiny shaving thing. If you use a knife, it can cut a divot in it really easily, but the shaver takes off just a little bit. And then now the rim looks cut. So I'm going to go back with my finger or with a sponge, and I'm going to wipe and shape that. So the sponge is lovely. I don't ever want to drip water on it, right? But I can lightly brush it with a damp sponge. If the surface starts to get sticky or gooey, you have added too much water and you need to let it rest. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second to see what kind of questions. Did everybody who made a pinch pot get their questions answered? And do you have any new questions about coil pots?
What's like a good thickness to have your pinch pots, like outer wall and rim, to be?
When it's finished?
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's definitely no bigger than 1/4 of an inch, and maybe 3/16. This one is thinner than my pinky, and I would drink or eat soup out of this. If it's less than 1/8 of an inch, it is super fragile. Not that it's not possible, it's just very fragile. Other questions? I think I'm done with this really up close demo. I'm just going to stop this sharing just for a second and